أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الأطيبين الأطهرين الهداة المهديين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم إلى قيام يوم الدين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. Respected ulama, dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. In today's session, inshallah, we will be talking a little bit about the role of religion and ideology and our Islamic conception of that role in our spiritual development and in our lives. And there are a few challenges that we have in being able to appreciate what it is that Islam wants us to think about the role of our religion and the role of our ideology in terms of. And I want briefly in the few minutes that I have to just kind of go through a very succinct and a very brief introduction to some of those themes that are important. And we can follow up in more detail during the question and answer session in the repercussions of those themes. So I want to begin with a question about whether we should think of religion and ideology primarily in individual terms or in collective and communal terms. For many of us, our belief, our doctrine, our practice, our religiosity is primarily an individual concern. And that is one of the problems of calling Islam a religion. Because religion is generally perceived as being a factor of one's individual beliefs and one's individual doctrine. And that is why we have probably one of the most pernicious terms in the English language, organized religion. Right, where then religion goes beyond just your individual doctrine and your individual belief, and horror of horrors, it becomes something that is collective and communal and organized, or as some people say, disorganized. That is generally how many of us think of what religion is. And some people will interpret lakum dinukum waliya din on that basis, that you can have your religion, I have my religion, we can all have our own individual religion. So the danger is that the word religion is often associated with you as an individual. How does Islam want us to think of religion? Is it an individual, or is it a collective enterprise? Clearly, the Qur'an is not speaking purely in collective terms, because lakum dinukum waliya din, la ikraha fid din. They do, at the very least, tell us, although there are differences among mufassirin about the exact details of what those verses mean, but they do, at the very least, clearly tell us that every individual has a moral imperative to choose a path, a belief system, a set of principles by which they are going to live, ethics and law. And so there is an individual element that the Qur'an affirms and that is present. That's not something that we should really have to spend a lot of time debating. But what is important is the Qur'an also speaks of a collective element, and it speaks of a collective element in a particular way. In other words, our belief system is not just something that each of us as individuals chooses. but it is something that has a presence and it has a collective existence. And because it is a living being as a collective, it has an effect on us as well. And that is why the Qur'an sometimes speaks in very blunt and very stark terms about religious differences or beliefs that it critiques. Some of us may have a little bit of a sense of surprise or awkwardness when we look at the very harsh critique that the Qur'an will give to the mushrikeen, the polytheists, or Ahlul Kitab, and in particular the Jews, that they cling to life, that they scheme against the believers and wish to turn them back into unbelievers. And that might seem to be kind of a very harsh judgment. If we're looking individually, then that kind of Quranic language might not seem to make much sense. But if we understand that the religion and religious belief system also has a collective aspect, then what the Qur'an is attacking harshly is the tendency of certain belief systems to have very real effects within society. And I want to just give a modern example to illustrate that point. Right? Generally, the modern Western world considers itself to be civilized. In fact, you will sometimes see members of various armed forces, and to keep my speech apolitical, I won't mention, you have to go and look at the news and find the instances that I'm referring to on your own. They will say that we're not like them uncivilized Arabs or Muslims. We don't send our young to get killed. We don't celebrate when they are martyred or killed. We're civilized. Right? We care about every one of our soldiers, of every one of our youth. Those armies will often have no compunction about carpet bombing, about eliminating the very infrastructure that keeps a city, a country, a society alive, harming combatants, harming civilians, harming many other people. Is that a valuing of life? Yes. Every one soldier's body bag can create a protest that why did our soldier die? At the same time, the destruction of an entire city of hundreds of thousands of people is collateral damage. What can you do? War is war. Where does that come from? Is that just a coincidence? Is that just because of the media hiding certain facts? Or is there an ideology behind it? A belief that I owe my loyalty to my nation and that the human rights or the success of citizens or members of my society is more important. Their life, their liberty, their comfort is more important to me. And I have a greater obligation to them than I have to somebody who is born on the other side of the border, who is not a member of my society. That valuing of one life is almost equivalent to the dehumanization and the devaluing of another life. And if we think that the problem is just that the media doesn't bring the cameras in and people don't see how bad war is, that's what the problem is, then we're fooling ourselves. That is a part of the problem. Right? That propaganda and all of those issues. But another part of the problem is the ideology that values and defines identity and human life in terms of affiliation, in terms of citizenship, in terms of nationality. And so in many ways, that culture that says that we celebrate martyrdom and we can come to terms with our soldiers going to their death because they're going to fight with chivalry and they're going to fight with honor. That might be a far more civilized culture and society. And in fact, in the aggregate, it might result in fewer deaths, particularly of non-combatants and of civilians. Now, I'm not trying to make a political argument or quantify a particular case, because there's always many other variables that come in a particular instance or a particular case. My point is simply to say that that collective aspect of ideology is very real, and it's present, and it affects our decision-making. And the Qur'an foregrounds that collective aspect as well. It says that there are certain parts of the ideology and of the value system proclaimed by the Jews that are pernicious to a human society and developing goodwill among various nations. If I say that I only owe my loyalty to my tribe, and my tribe is a chosen tribe, and other people are not to be dealt with on the basis of justice, I don't owe them anything, and I don't owe them even the fulfillment of a contract or a pledge or a covenant that I make with them, then that is pernicious, and that is evil. Now, the people the Qur'an was addressing self-identified and were identified by others as Yahud, as Jews. That doesn't mean that the Qur'an is anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish. It means that any group that has that kind of an ideology is condemned by the Qur'an. The application of that verse might apply to a group that self-identifies as Muslims if they follow that system or that kind of a logic that the Jews at that time followed. We might be very well justified in saying that yes, the Qur'an says Yahud, but it means Zionists, not Jews. Because today the language has changed, the associations have changed, and there might be many Jewish people who don't follow that creed and that value system that the Qur'an so severely condemns. That's not fudging it and trying to take the edge off of the Qur'an. That is to be accurate to the Qur'an and to prevent it from being viewed only as a historical document. There is a reason why the Qur'an used a particular strong language of condemnation, and the Qur'an tells us what that logic is. And it can be applied today. The terms might change. And so we might not say, La'natullahi ala al-Yahud, not because we want to depart from the Quranic language or from the Quranic principle, but because we want to apply it accurately. And that comes from a verse of Surah An-Nisa, verse 123. This is one of those hard verses of the Qur'an. This is a verse that the Muslims found hard in the time of the Prophet and the time of the Imams. And this is not a fire and brimstone verse. This is not a kill them all, let God sort them out verse. We don't actually have that verse in the Qur'an. But this is a verse that superficially might not seem to be that big a deal. But for many Muslims it was quite a shock and quite a difficult verse to digest. The Qur'an says, لَيْسَ بِأَمَانِيِّكُمْ وَلَا أَمَانِيِّ أَهْلِ الْكِتَابِ مَنْ يَعْمَلْ سُوءًا يُجْزَ بِهِ. That's addressing the believers. It doesn't follow what you would want, and it doesn't follow what Ahlul Kitab would want. Whoever does evil is going to be compensated for the evil that they do. Don't say that, well, I'm a Muslim, so I can run willy-nilly in society, do whatever I want. I don't have to be fair to the Jews. I don't have to be fair to the Christians. They're not even following the right religion. I'm Shia, I don't owe anything to the Sunni, or I'm Sunni and I don't owe anything to the Shia, and so on and so forth. You might want that, the Qur'an says to the believers. Ahlul Kitab might want that. That's not how it works. مَنْ يَعْمَلْ سُوءًا يُجْزَ بِهِ. Whoever does evil will be punished and will be compensated according to what they do. So what the Qur'an is saying is that this is the principle that Allah wants the believers to follow. If the Qur'an condemns the Jews for saying that we are chosen people, then it also condemns the Muslims who might want to say that, well, we're the chosen religion, we're the right religion. The rules that apply to everyone else do not apply to us. And time again, the Qur'an speaks of justice and dealing with others with justice, and justice only has meaning if it is a concept that has mutuality and reciprocality. So this verse was seen by many Muslims as being a very difficult and a very harsh verse. Why? Because Abu Huraira, according to one hadith, said that, well, then what good is our faith? If we're going to be punished and we're going to be held to a high standard, we're basically in the same boat. And there is also a hadith that the son of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam, his son Ismail came to the Imam and he said, what do you say about the unbelievers of, or the sinners of your followers, your Shia, and the sinners of other groups of Muslims? If somebody is a Shia, are they off the hook when they sin? And the Imam recited this verse. He said, لَيْسَ بِأَمَانِيِّكُمْ وَلَا أَمَانِيَّ أَهْلِ الْكِتَابِ. Just like a Muslim cannot say to a non-Muslim, we're off the hook, if you are a follower of the Imam, if you are a Shi'i, then you cannot say to another person that I'm off the hook. Now, what is the outcome of that? You might feel like you're basically without any protection in the hereafter. And that is where we have a hadith from the Prophet and from the Imams that say that Allah provides an opportunity for believers to compensate and to atone for their sins. So if you are a believer, then Allah will put various forms of suffering within your life. In some ahadith, it is said that those sufferings will be commensurate with your sins and with your mistakes. Not that people who suffer more are more sinful, because some forms of suffering are a test and a trial and a means to raise a person's spiritual rank. But one of the things that does increase our hardships and our sufferings in life is our sins, to atone for those sins. It doesn't work in reverse. I can't say because somebody suffered a loss, because they went bankrupt, they must have been a bad person. Because they suffered ill health or they had a difficult death, they must have been a bad person. But one of the things that does cause those is in order to atone for our sins. So the ahadith tell us that for the believer, this avenue is given. They still have to make up for their sins. It's not that they'll be off the hook, but either during their life, and then in one hadith from the sixth Imam, it says that if it doesn't work in life that you have been able to atone for all of your mistakes, then Allah will make the process of dying either physically or spiritually difficult for that person until they have atoned for their sins. So they enter into the hereafter in a purified state. And then that process of purification for the soul, it may even need to continue after death. So that opportunity is there. In other words, Allah provides grace for the believer and means for us to better ourselves. I might make the intention to commit a sin, and Allah will send a reminder for me to prevent me from committing that sin. I may be tempted, and Allah will provide that strength to prevent me from succumbing to temptation. I may actually succumb to the temptation, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will then provide me through hardships, through suffering, a means for atonement. There is something special that comes to a believer that is not available, or that is not available in the same way and in the same intimacy to a non-believer. But what is it that is available? It's not that invincibility potion. It's not that get out of jail free card. We will atone just as every other human being will atone for the evil that we do. it is that Allah will provide the guidance and the strength and the means for us to atone. So that is a message that allows a person to be able to interact in respect and in justice with members of other religions and other ideologies. And the Qur'an, therefore, very strongly condemns any ideology that separates one group and says that we are better than or we are superior to other human beings. In view of this verse, we can actually see that harsh language of the Qur'an as being a very inspiring and a very beautiful moral principle. It is giving us a difficult standard as believers, just as it is also calling to account members of other religions or other schools of thought or other ideologies for the implicit and the inherent prejudices and injustices that they might follow. So now, there is a collective component to our belief system and to our religion. That's what we've established so far. And the Qur'an foregrounds that and speaks in very stark terms about that in order to give a consistent religious message. Once we understand that, then we can also understand why the Qur'an sometimes applies a collective responsibility for certain actions. Normally, the principle of the Qur'an is وَلَا تَزِرُ وَازِرَةٌ وِزْرَ أُخْرَى. No bearer of a burden will carry the burden of another person. So that is a general principle that the Qur'an gives. But at the same time, we say that the Qur'an, or we see that the Qur'an says to the Jews, لِمَ تَقْتُلُونَ أَنْبِيَاءَ اللَّهِ مِنْ قَبْلُ إِن كُنْتُم مُؤْمِنِينَ. If you are believers, why do you kill the prophets of God before? When did the Jews kill the prophets of God? Certainly not in the time of the Prophet. They never were able to kill the Prophet. They weren't able to kill Prophet Isa alayhi salam. So it was centuries, generations ago, in a different time and a different place, that the Jews did that. And yet the Qur'an criticizes and the Qur'an condemns the Jews who were contemporary to the Prophet, فَلِمَ تَقْتُلُونَ أَنْبِيَاءَ اللَّهِ, in the present tense, min qabl. You did this before. You did this before. Why? Why that collective responsibility? Does that go against the principle of لَا تَزِرُ وَازِرَةٌ وِزْرَ أُخْرَى or not? Well, on an individual level, they didn't do it. But on a collective level, they still were the heirs of that religion and that belief system, and they honored those people who had committed those crimes, which means that in moral terms, they were responsible. And in practical terms, they would be susceptible to repeat those very crimes because they had never spiritually and religiously condemned or come to terms with that injustice. And so because of that collective responsibility, or because of that collective reality and identity of a religion, there is a collective responsibility that also comes for every member of that ideology or of that religion. To be on the safe side, we might say that, all right, I'm going to flee from any kind of affiliation. I'm just myself. But by the very act of fleeing from an affiliation, we're also shirking our responsibility. I can say that, well, I'm not responsible for what my family does. But by the very act of dissociating myself from my family, when I might have been able to have a positive influence and prevent them from committing certain harm or certain crimes, then I'm not really able to save myself from the moral responsibility for what they are doing. So what the Qur'an tells us is that because there is a collective reality, there is also a collective responsibility that I as an individual have towards that collective. What does that mean in practical terms for you and me? Well, one thing that it means is that we have a stake and we have a responsibility in ensuring that that collective identity of our faith always stands up for what is right and what is moral. The actions that you and I do, in particular the actions that you and I do in the name of our religion, the positions that we take, the values that we practice and that we speak about, they are going to form the religious identity. They are going to strengthen that collective identity, or they are going to weaken it. And so we have a very strong responsibility now to ensuring that Islam and the school of Ahlul Bayt uphold and are known to uphold the highest of ideals and values. We should be critical and we should be introspective, but we should do so not standing outside in judgment of them, but with a healthy process of trying to improve and trying to better our own religious environment and our atmosphere. Now, a few more verses that I will talk about, and then inshallah we will continue the discussion in the discussion period or the question and answer period. There is a collective identity, there is an individual identity, and those are often in tension. And one of the things that I hope we will be able to explore is how the word deen in Arabic, which sometimes we translate as religion, connects to both of those aspects. The final point, though, that I will make before I relinquish this wonderful microphone is that the Qur'an speaks about the nature of religion, or the nature of our devotion to God, in material terms and also in spiritual terms. Many of us, we tend to think of religion primarily in terms of what it means for us in life. We think of it in terms of what we need to believe, and we think of it in terms of what we need to do. The Qur'an, however, although it speaks about our material life, it also reminds us that the true measure of your deen and your religion and your devotion and your worship and your law and all of those meanings are part of the semantic range of the word deen. It is first and foremost a matter of the hereafter. It is first and foremost a matter of judgment. It is first and foremost a matter of the deeper purpose of our life. And so when Allah introduces Himself as the Lord and the owner of the hereafter, we say, Maliki Yawmiddin, the owner of the day of deen. Now, deen, as has been mentioned by Mufassirin, has different meanings. One of those meanings is the reward or punishment that a person gets for their good or bad deeds. And so some have said that, well, here the word deen is used in that specific sense. In other places in the Qur'an, it is used in other senses of worship or of law or of devotion. But if we look at it, this is perhaps not just one of the usages of the word deen, but it is a reminder of what the essence of deen is. That all of those different smaller aspects of what do I believe and what do I practice and what are the rituals and the laws that I follow, they all fit it together and they are integrated in that they affect where I stand on the day of judgment. And remembering that that is the essence of what deen is will help us develop an integrative aspect, a holistic aspect of our various processes and roles within life. There is room for uncertainty. There is room for doubt and for self-doubt. There is always room for growth and development. But sometimes those processes of doubt and of growth and of development can be destabilizing. But if you remember that, well, my study of Islamic belief, my study of Islamic practice, all of that is trying to feed into a specific stance on the Day of Judgment. Then that will make it much easier for me to move through that process, even have certain doubts and uncertainties, but come to an understanding of what my responsibilities are. That gives me strength and helps me move through that uncertainty. And so I will conclude with a verse of Surah An-Nur, verse number 25, I believe it is. يَوْمَئِذٍ يُوَفِّيهِمُ اللَّهُ دِينَهُمُ الْحَقِّ. It is on that day that God will give back to all human beings دِينَهُمُ الْحَقِّ, their true religion. So the ibadah, the belief, everything that you had within your religion, that is going to be presented to all of us on the Day of Judgment. That is the essence of our deen. And that makes it much easier for us to move things from a theoretical and from a hypothetical realm to say that, what is it that I want to be given on the Day of Judgment? It gives us a different perspective that helps us make better decisions and helps us even have uncertainties, but still have anchor points within our life. Inshallah, we will explore that more during the discussion period. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.